Are we live, Armando?
Yes.
Great. Well, good morning, everybody, for another installment of the ACA's Empowering Rural Arizona webinar. Today, we are very fortunate to have the Arizona State Land Commissioner, Lisa Atkins, with us. We've tried several times to have Commissioner Atkins on in the past, and the robust activity in her office has taken her away from us. So we're very lucky to have her today. I am just honored that she carved out some time for us. So Commissioner Atkins, welcome.
Thanks.
I've known you for a long time. Would you care to share a little bit about where you come from and what you've done before you became the land commissioner?
Born and raised in Arizona, very, very proud of that. Grew up in Tucson until my junior year in high school, where because of a change in our family business, and so that's why this conversation to me is so vital. Moved to Phoenix, couldn't get out of Phoenix fast enough when I graduated from high school to get back down to Tucson to the U of A. Spent my last semester in college interning at the Arizona legislature, which kicked off the next 45 years of my life, which was interning for the Senate president, a gentleman by the name of Bob Stump, who was a cotton farmer and a rancher out in Tolleson with his dad. He ran for Congress that year. I was part of the campaign staff and was the first staffer when he was successfully elected in November of 1976. First staffer in the door in December, and the last staffer out when he retired 26 years ago. So, yeah, it wasn't that I couldn't find a job. It's just that I fell in love with the one that happened to cross my path at the moment. And then from there, when I'm sorry, it was 2002. When Congressman Stump retired in 2002, I came back to Arizona and managed the County Supervisors Association for about 18 months before I was asked by Greater Phoenix leadership to be their Vice President of Public Policy, which is actually where I met the governor when he was a member of GPL. And when I worked with the governor when he was treasurer on some issues, and when he became governor, he asked if I would come to the State Land Department because he knows my passion about land and water in Arizona. And the history of serving a member of Congress who represented essentially the western half of the state for all those years is just part of my DNA. So I've been very blessed and incredibly fortunate to do the things that I love.
And you've also got a bit of a background in water, if I'm not mistaken.
You're not mistaken. That too was a part of my education on Capitol Hill. In the early days, meaning in the late 70s, early 80s, Arizona was still fighting very, very hard for appropriations to complete the Central Arizona Project. For those that are familiar with Colorado River water, we are the junior user on the river, which means that we have to pay far more attention to what's going on. It has been a strengthening of the spirit to be the junior water user. Before we ever grew into the allocation, and we don't take everything, the Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima counties don't take everything off the river. The Colorado River Indian Tribe has an allocation. All the farming and those of you on the phone from Mojave and Yuma County will know exactly what I'm talking about. A lot of that predates our Colorado River Compact. So Central Arizona Project is not the only user. In fact, is a junior user on the river. And Rita McGuire, who is now in private practice, when she was the ADWR director, realized that California had a very deep straw on the river, and anything Arizona didn't use, they were taking. And those were the days when we realized at some point there may be years when there wasn't sufficient water. So that's when Arizona really got down to planning our future. And we started taking water off the river, even though we weren't going to use it and recharge it. So for all of you who are watching the watershed news right now, please know that in every corner of this state, we have spent decades preparing for this particular heat wave and what it's doing to the Colorado. But that's not the only place that we focus on water. We focus wherever water is. We learn the lessons from the people who were here before us and have improved on it. How we irrigate in the desert was pretty much defined in Arizona, in the cotton fields of Pinal County. So you can tell I'm passionate about land and water. So I'll stop there. But yeah, my volunteer activity is as a member of this, an elected member of the Central Arizona Project Board. And I've been on there literally since I came back from Washington, so since 2003.
Well, that's incredible. Thank you for your service and your foresight in helping to plan for the future use of Arizona's water. I think that's really fortunate for us that are in the situation today. Well, Commissioner, tell us a little bit about the land department. How much land is under your management? What are some of the functions that the department does? I think there's a misnomer that you are the owner of anything that is state land. Is it a trust? Is it a piece of the state government? How does it work?
So Arizona is no different than any other continental state that was brought into the union, and this is a practice that goes back to the 1700s, far earlier than even the nation was founded. But if you think of it this way, on the very first day of statehood, the expectation is that you have a state government formed, you have citizens to serve, and there's got to be a revenue stream to do that. Well, no government can be stood up with a reasonable checking account, so to speak. So the federal government, particularly west of the Mississippi, when granting statehood, also granted tracts of land, sections of land. And they're very specific as to what they are. Those are called trust lands. And the whole purpose was to provide a new state an opportunity to generate revenue for public services. In the case of Arizona and New Mexico, who came into the union at the same time, we got to have we inherited a more restrictive use for our trust lands. They're not just the surface lands, they're also the subsurface minerals. If water's involved in some places, that's the case. Most of the states have trees, harvest, things that are grown on their state trust lands to provide a revenue stream. So you've got an asset that will produce revenue, and you have a defined set of users. In Arizona's case, there are 13 beneficiaries that are in the state constitution, the largest of which is K-12. We were granted 10 million acres at statehood, and there are still 9.2, let's just say a little bit more than 9 million acres still in the portfolio 100 years later.
Wow.
They're scattered. There are particular sections and townships throughout the state. They're scattered throughout the state. There is not one county in which we don't have a footprint of the state trust. And I would argue that today's economy in Maricopa and Pinal County speaks to the value of having those trust parcels intermingled in private land ownership. And we unfortunately do have some intermingled in federal land ownership. So we've got trapped lands in national monuments. We have lands that we can't get to, but overall, the State Land Department was the very first agency that was stood up at statehood, and DEQ and DWR and any natural resource agency really came out of the State Land Department. In fact, forestry was in fact a part of the State Land Department until recent history, during the Napolitano and Brewer administrations, when we had all those catastrophic fires in eastern Arizona, and they broke DFFM out as a separate agency. But I had a meeting in this very room yesterday with the forester because I depend on him, he depends on us. We have lessees on private and state trust and federal lands in common. So I'm very happy we end up working with everybody, whether it's water, air quality, water quality, or forest issues, any natural, and game and fish, by the way, because if you hold a sportsman's license, you have access to state trust land for hunting and fishing.
So if I have a hunting license, I have access to state trust lands?
Yes, sir.
Wow, I didn't know that. So I've already.
Because unfortunately, we've not been able to train the critters where state trust land is. So I'm sorry, I should be far more serious in case we
No,
have
you
on
shouldn't.
the line. So actually, there are three very specific Attorney General's opinions that give the hunting and sporting community access to through state trust land for their activities. I will tell you, I learned that is not usual. New Mexico, who is our sister in coming into the Union at the same time, they control whether or not hunters and fishermen can get on state trust land, and they charge them. So I came home from a meeting thinking, we need revenue, and I know where to get it. Until my Attorney General was sitting in the office when I came roaring through, I have a great idea. She said, no, I'm going to send you 3 AG's opinions. Hunters and fishermen, if they have a license from Game and Fish, have automatic access to state trust lands.
Wow, well that's terrific.
Yep.
Well,
so Keith, let me start this because this is economic development, and I've been trying to pivot the department from just being known as a land department to being an economic development department. And this is an important construct. There are slightly more acres in private ownership in the state of Arizona than there are 9.2 million acres of state trust land. So let's just round it off and say there are 11 million acres of private land ownership in the state and 9. So about 20 million acres altogether. Everything else in the state of Arizona is either owned or managed by the federal government. And you in particular, as economic development folks, understand that it is the private sector economy that really is the foundation of a healthy economy. So if you think about the trust land as being of equal importance to private property in Arizona, recognizing that everything else is either owned or managed by the feds, and they don't really, with the exception of payment in lieu of taxes or something else, we don't realize any economic development contributions from federal lands. Tourism, yes, but on a day-to-day basis where you have a piece of property that is privately owned and generating tax revenue for the local community or the county, that is a huge part of our economic development. So when I got here, I recognized that was a missing link in our DNA that we talk about. And just to underscore that, and particularly for this group, to understand that I don't believe that the economy begins and ends in Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County. If you are on the phone from those 3 counties, I know that you're a critical part, but there are quite a few other counties that would argue with that. And there are communities in those counties that don't get their strength from the urban core of the state. So I will tell you that we have sold a significant amount of land on the governor's watch. Probably for us, a significant amount is more than 35,000 acres. And half of that land has been sold outside of the Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima corridor, which to me is fabulous because economic development happens in every corner of the state. And wherever the trust has a footprint, we need to be part of that, to watch that transition as communities grow from publicly managed land, specifically for a trust, to private ownership that contributes to the community.
Well, you're singing our tune, Commissioner.
Good.
So, and I have to say, in my 30 years of doing this kind of work in Arizona, I have never experienced a more friendly and cooperative administration at the state land department than yours. And so I for one, am grateful to you. And I know that we here at the ACA have been engaged with you quite extensively over the last several years on several extraordinary projects that have come.
Beyond extraordinary, Keith.
Yes.
I mean, you can't, who ever thought that the Taiwanese chip making company would be in Arizona. And I say that for two reasons. One, I love the fact that they bought state trust land. It was one of the biggest sales that we've had. And so the beneficiaries, thank you very much for including us in that conversation. I know we have several others in the pipeline. You and I have worked on some as well. We're the last large landowner in the state as far as essentially private land. So when somebody's looking for a large footprint, the state land department comes to mind. And it's not just in the metropolitan area. We've been successfully selling land throughout the entire state. But I would like to give you one little example about how I made sure everybody on the staff understood this. It wasn't too long after I came to the land department that the vice mayor of Eager, Arizona called. And I apologize for those of you who have heard this story, but it's really the foundation of my believing how critical the trust is, not just for selling land and putting the proceeds in the treasurer's office and the permanent fund, which, by the way, is worth more than $17 billion. Just throw that little number out for you.
Round numbers.
Yeah, really. Round number, $17 billion. It's an important funding mechanism for all 13 of the beneficiaries, not just K-12. But the vice mayor called and said, there's a section of land in Eager, and we've been trying to annex it into our town for 12 years. And I know that government can work slow, but I never imagined that it could work that slow. And the root of the problem was, if you're busy selling land in Scottsdale, which is some of the most valuable land in the state, you don't think about the land in Eager being just as important to the community in Eager as that land in Scottsdale is for Scottsdale's growth. And that was the reset that we had in the land department, that everywhere where growth can potentially occur, and the land department has a footprint, it's in everyone's interest to transition that land to private holdings because of the tax situation. But also that money goes to the treasurer's office and is invested for generations to be able to fund K-12 education, all three of the universities, the school for the deaf and blind, and the remaining 10 of the beneficiaries, which goes on and on. So if you look at the land department that way, we do in fact have an asset that has to be managed. If you give someone your money to manage for your retirement, you don't want them to just sit and watch it. You want them to actively manage that portfolio, and that's what we do. It's a little bit more of a challenge for us because 8.5 million of the 9.2 million in the portfolio are non-urban, are in the rural part of the state. Growth is not going to hit those areas for a long time, but we have a responsibility to manage those lands to maintain and enhance the value of those lands. So that's why the forester and I were meeting yesterday, because many of our rural lands have been caught in this season's fire, which is just horrible. But
Indeed.
Okay, I'll be quiet. You asked the question. Sorry.
No,
I get so carried away.
This is instructive. So walk us through that example with Eager. Eager wanted to annex a piece of land in their industrial area. I recall this because we gave them a grant to put in some infrastructure.
See, we were already working together.
That's right. That's right. So walk us through how that works at your department.
So we take a look. We've had other communities that have wanted to come in and annex large swaths of land. And sometimes they're looking ahead at their potential developments. Sometimes they're just trying to keep a neighboring community from growing. So we very carefully look at why somebody wants to annex state trust land. In this case, it really was critical to economic development in Eager. And when we do our evaluation as to whether or not it's in the best interest of the trust, the timing is right. It will be someday, because you never want to leave out parcels in any incorporated area. Then we have a requirement, according to statutes, that we have to go to the
highest and best use.
No, why did I just blank on the selection board? I'm sorry. We have to get permission. Sorry. I have to get permission for a lot of things. But I don't have, while I have a great deal of discretion, or any commissioner has a great deal of discretion, there are certain things that require oversight, for lack of a better word, and the selection committee is one of them. And it's made up of the governor, the treasurer, and the attorney general. And clearly, because it's made up of those three people, I am appointed by the governor. Our funds get deposited in the treasurer's office. And of course, everybody wants to make sure that what the land department is doing with this fabulous asset is legal. So we make a presentation to the selection board. They give us a thumbs up or thumbs down about whether or not they agree with our analysis that the timing is right and it's beneficial for the long-term interests of not only the trust, but the community that's seeking that annexation. And then we begin. We have some meetings ahead of going to selection committee. With the selection committee gives us a thumbs up, then we follow annexation requirements just like any other landowner would in working with the community. We try and get those zoning issues done ahead of time as part of the governor's management system tools that we all inherited at the beginning of his tenure to do business in a business-like manner. So if we can iron out the zoning requirements, and that actually helps us when we annex the land into a community, because then when we go to sell that land, those decisions are already made, and it actually is far more attractive to getting people to an auction. So,
Has greater value. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And so a city or a town can proactively entitle a piece of state trust land and as well as annex it, obviously with the department's permission.
We instigate it. It's just not permission. We're actually working out an agreement. It's not permission. So we've gotten permission to do several sections of land in Peoria, and we're in the process of going through and working with the city of Peoria right now to come up with the zoning, what we call the zoning banks that are consistent with where they want to grow. We're never, at least on my watch, and I don't think it's productive otherwise, to go in and dictate to a local community
right.
what they're going to do. We need to be partners because they don't have to grant us annexation. They don't have to grant us zoning. So it's the foundation of building that relationship with Eager. And it also, as a sidebar, allowed us to reestablish a relationship with the League of Cities and Towns that during a depression, essentially, when the department wasn't selling anything, those relationships tend to kind of fall apart if you don't maintain them. So I'm just absolutely delighted that Tom Belshie is the head of the league. I have a long history with the league, going all the way back to Jack Dabalski, and I'm very happy with the fact that we're working so closely with all the league members.
Tom does a great job, and in fact, I think he's from that area.
Yep.
And his family owns and operates the Dairy Queen.
He was in the meeting when I told the vice mayor that we were going to get on this. So he was.
Oh, that's terrific.
Yeah, he was very excited.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And so once this entitlement action happens through this partnership, then is it the parcel brought to market, or is that, how is that arranged?
It isn't necessarily, I don't know that we've actually sold anything in Eager yet, but at least we have the foundation there. So it'll be annexed into the community. The planning and zoning issues will be addressed. So if they have somebody that is interested in buying state land, we're ready to go. So it just is that first formal step that is taken together. It's always better to be inside the boundaries than subject a buyer to, say, county regulations when you're inside an incorporated area.
Sure. Oh, sure.
So, and it's much better as far as the nature of being part of the community instead of just kind of bulldozing your way in.
And so what I'm hearing is it really is that simple, in that a request can be brought to the department to bring a parcel to auction.
Right.
I think to me that decodes a lot of the mystique around the state land department. I don't think a lot of people knew that.
So, we just had a major sale a few months ago on lands out in Superstition Vistas.
Mm-hmm.
If you stand on the border of Maricopa and Pinal County and look east, everything you see is on a map. It would be blue, but everything that is within your view shed is essentially part of the trust if it's not already in private ownership. We are the largest landowner in Pinal County. And there is a great demand in the East Valley. And so we identified about 8,500 acres and did a first of its kind development. We decided what it was we wanted to do in conjunction with folks in the community out there. I'm happy to say that we had one of the largest land sales in the history of the department to D.R. Horton. And it's a breakthrough for what eventually will be developed in 8,500 acres, and Apache Junction is in the process of annexing that land right now. So it will be a huge master plan development area for this foreseeable future because the area is just growing like crazy.
Incredible, incredible to hear, and that area is exploding. Let's talk land leases. Your favorite thing.
Let's not. Okay. You ask, I'll repeat.
Well, is there, in terms of a length of a land lease term, is there a standard that you apply per use, or how does that work?
So I will tell you very honestly that we have not been doing leases during this administration. Most of the leases are done for 99 years. Now, when I say we're not doing leases, we're not doing real estate leases, commercial leases.
Okay.
We do lease land for ag and grazing because those are management tools. When you have 8.5 million acres that you don't, we have less than 100 people on our staff. And I only have 5 guys on the ground, essentially. You can stretch it to maybe 8, depending on what their responsibilities are. But you've got to manage land. Land is like any other asset. It's got to be managed in order to maintain and enhance its value. And unfortunately, in Arizona, we have such wide open spaces. You never know if you're on a piece of BLM land, forest land, state land. You don't know, private land. But it's all got to be managed in one way or another. However, what we discovered when we got here was that commercial leases, it hasn't been updated in so long, and it's so intricate to do that there are very few people that want to lease state trust land. They would much rather buy. And when you think about the conversion from a public asset, a public trust asset, to private property, that begins to make sense. Even doing a solar lease can get very detail oriented because of the way the lease language is written. So we've been trying to find some assistance, and it's not easy because of the trust responsibilities to find somebody to do that. So we rarely lease. It seems that we've had good success. And I think part of the reason for that is we know the downside to those leases. We're experiencing them in some of the renewals that need to be done. We particularly learned that lesson during COVID when some folks had needed some assistance, and we wanted to maintain them as lessees. And the complications in the lease on a commercial lease were prohibitive in some cases.
Interesting.
Yeah. And quite honestly, the return on an investment of having sale proceeds go to the treasurer's office are much better in the long run right now because the economy is so vibrant and the interest rate is so good that it outstrips any benefit of having a 99-year lease.
Wow. The Mayor McFarland from Casa Grande asked a question about how a city can request that the department bring a parcel to market. You want to take a shot at that?
There is absolutely. You can either have your staff call our planning staff, or I'll call your office this afternoon, and you can put me in touch or tell Keith who I need to talk to, and we'll get a conversation going. If it's a parcel that you have planned, or you know that if you know that there's somebody who's interested in buying it, just have them contact us directly. So one way or another, Keith and I will follow up on that.
You bet. You bet. Terrific. I know that Lake Havasu City has a long history with the state land department. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So we have quite a state trust land, and the reason I'm laughing is not because I don't absolutely love Havasu, I do. And I have a long history with Havasu, and I really never thought that I would meet myself coming and going with regard to Havasu. So when the Central Arizona project, this is how my worlds collide. When the Central Arizona project was built, when the canal was built, all the way from the first intake valve over on the Colorado through, the federal government came in and took land. And a lot of that land was state trust land, because in those days, I mean, we're talking about the 60s and the 70s and the 80s, not a lot of development. So when the federal government took land from the state for the building of the CAP canal, they came back and allowed the state to be able to pick up federal parcels, what we call in lieu. So the entire island in Havasu is in lieu. And there is a history between the land department and Lake Havasu, and it's a very rich and wonderful history. And it's a community that is growing into a very vibrant community. And I credit the local leadership with that, because they've had a vision for what they were going to do with their community. And through thick and thin and growth and heat and all the things that happen, I have quite a good and engaging conversation on a fairly regular basis with the mayor. And he came in one day and said, "We're growing." And I said, "All I can tell you is think big." Because in a community like that, it's probably good that the land department is far more aggressive in trying to meet community needs with the land being in someone else's ownership. So we happen to own something right on the beach, in addition to owning a lot of land in the island, which I understand from my staff there has been interest peaked, and we may have some sales going on over there, hopefully sometime this year. But when you have challenges such as growing homeless population or people looking for shelter, and they pick outdoors for it, and they probably have far more needs than living on a beach somewhere, it was incumbent upon the land department and the leadership of the city to come up with a plan for how we would handle that. We don't have a staff to be able, every winter I get calls anywhere where we have land near a river or a body of water where all the trees have grown up, and those are ideal locations all over the city, all over the valley, for homeless to start to congregate. And they, fires are lit to stay warm in the winter time, and that gets out of control. We don't have a crew on our hands to be able to address those. So the relationship with any city, including Havasu, has become very important, so that we can appropriately manage where the footprint is and not be a drag on the city. So we've developed quite a relationship with them. As I said, I told the mayor to think big, and I think we're beginning to see some of the fruits of that labor. So transitioning that community with some state trust land, we're looking forward to. Actually, any community I'm looking forward to. That tells me we have a vibrant economy, and that we have people that want to move to Arizona. And what better thing to do than go from trust property to private property, because it helps everybody. It helps education because of the monies that get deposited in the permanent fund, but it also is a huge economic development opportunity for any community. So we're open for business is the bottom line.
Love it. I love it. I know a lot of our communities are beset with housing challenges and the lack of supply.
We've got the land. I have been trying to figure out, I've had conversations with elected officials around the state, and my next stop will be to talk to the governor's new director of housing, Tom Simplot, who's an old friend of mine. We can't give, I have very strict requirements for how we dispose of state trust land. it has to be sold for its value, its appraised value. I don't think our leases for a long-term situation are that good, are in anybody's interest. But I've been trying to figure out how we can work with a variety of communities, because workforce housing is an issue that you find in every community in this state. And we have a lot of land, particularly outside of the urban core, that I'm trying to figure out how we can contribute to finding a solution. I'm not there yet, but I want to be part of the conversation.
Yeah, I know Cottonwood is having that very issue.
The whole Verde Valley.
Yeah, for
And even
sure.
Flagstaff as well, when you think about it. So, and we have decent footprints in those areas. Any community is probably going to have more of that challenge than they were before we had such a huge influx of folks after during COVID.
There's a question that came up. Can a rancher that has a lease look to purchase state land?
If I determine that it's in the interest of the trust to sell it.
Okay, gotcha.
But it's not, it has to follow the same rules as any other land that we take to auction. And that is, we cannot sell land from the portfolio that doesn't go to auction. It has to have an appraisal value. It has to go to the Board of Appeals, which is a group that's appointed by the executive that is charged with reviewing our valuations and to make sure that we meet that very basic criteria, and that is land can't be sold for anything less than its appraised value. And then we take it, if we get approval from the Board of Appeals, we have to auction it for 10 or advertise it for 10 weeks. We're still part of the newspaper industry. We actually have to advertise it in a newspaper close to the Capitol, so that ends up being the Capitol Times. And then any auction has to be advertised for 10 weeks in the county seat of the county in which the land is being sold. So if there is a rancher that wants to buy the state trust land, they are more than welcome to come in and file an application. But they have to remember that that land will be put up to public auction. So that is to make sure that the beneficiaries get their full value out of their asset.
And what are some of the items that you consider when you yourself, Commissioner, are making that decision of whether or not to bring it to auction?
Well, our job is to maximize the value of every part of the trust. So if that's not an area that is looks like it has growth potential in the future, we'll probably hold on to it. We aren't going to sell a section of land in an area of grazing to go into private ownership, because that can result in its own challenges. Where the trust land, there are several areas where large private ranches have gone into other ownership and they're being developed for housing. And we own every other section, which is not an unusual pattern in the state of Arizona. And the lands that are not included, the state lands that are not included in any planning or sale, end up becoming dumping grounds, unfortunately. And I'm not accusing everybody of doing this, but it's just an open section of land in Arizona. Just has got imaginary signs, I guess, to please dump your old boat here. And I don't mean one that you'd use in your bathtub. We've removed the most interesting items from state trust land because it's open space and nobody's going to know if you dump your refrigerator. So with the growth in many communities, and I'm thinking about Prescott and Flagstaff outside of Maricopa, Pinal, and Pima County, when you've got growth and it's every other section that somebody comes in and wants to develop, I pay particular attention, and I'm now broken the mold in the land department. We've got a couple of large ranches that have sold, and people come in and want rights of way across the trust land, and we're actually convincing them it would be better in the long run if they go ahead and buy the intermingled, the every other section of land. If there's going to be a huge housing development, that tells me that there's going to be other growth as well. There's no sense in holding on to trust land just for the sake of holding on to it if we can be part of the economic development.
it makes a lot of sense. I want to get into some of the other areas that are maybe not so much in the public eye of what the department does. Early on in the state's foray into accelerating broadband out to the rural areas, we determined there was a barrier at the department, and you deployed your team with amazing speed, and they got it resolved. You want to talk a little bit about that?
So I think every organization will face a time in their history where they just do things the old-fashioned way. You know, it's been done this way for 100 years. There is absolutely no reason why we need to change. In this case, we've done all of our work on paper for 100 years, and there really wasn't any reason to change until this commissioner showed up at her first staff meeting and said, so on Saturday morning at 3 o'clock in the morning, if I want to check the status of some project that we're working on, how do I do that? And there was laughter. It wasn't even polite giggles. There was laughter throughout the entire room. And some brave soul, actually it happened to be one of the range guys, said, well, you get in your car and you drive down to the land department. And I said, why? Because we do things on paper. So I thought of that conversation when the governor's broadband initiative came up, thinking, why are we always the drag? Everybody thinks that the land department is the drag on getting anything done. And it was true. You know, you've got a process that works, and it works for how we do business here, and you don't have to go back and look at it. But we had some mentors in the executive and at Commerce who were very helpful to us to understand what the difference meant. And when you start thinking about broadband being deployed around the entire state, and the impact of the example that the governor used to the legislature had to do with an accident. But we're also talking about economic development, about education for our kids, all sorts of modern day things that those of us who can have choices about our communication styles in the city don't realize those choices are not readily available. So we took a look at what we already do and determined that what we already do could be tweaked just enough that we didn't have to invent a new wheel. And that's what broke through. And I am very proud of my guys in Rights of Way, because they were the ones who said, we've already given this permission. We know exactly how to meet the constitutional requirements, that the trust is compensated for all of its assets. It's just a matter of coming up with a slightly different process. So we are, in fact, encouraging people to use existing rights of way. So APS has been a fabulous partner with us in that. And the co-ops, there's lots of partners. And we've been able to stand up a system that we hope contributes to getting broadband rapidly deployed across the state instead of being a drag on the process.
Well, it's been such a critical piece of infrastructure that's been lacking for so long that it's just absolutely necessary to our daily lives. And I know it's a high priority with the governor. So thank you again for doing that.
Well, the other thing is, Keith, that I don't think people understand the value of partnerships among state agencies. And that's this agency, the State Land Department, has been siloed for so long because nobody understands what we do. And we don't do it much except for, you know, managing land unless there's a huge economic boom. And I think what we've been able to convince partners like you is we can make that contribution when the economy isn't growing at 1,000 miles an hour.
Right.
Because we do have sections ideally located for growth of several kinds, not just when there's a huge economic upturn. That the most important part of making that successful is building relationships. So the relationship that we built with Commerce is invaluable. I will tell you, you guys are keeping us busier than we ever imagined. I will politely say in public, yay for you, but let me tell you, we're all exhausted over here. Every time I turn around, there's a new commerce project, which is great. But I've made it abundantly clear that our partners are the local governments as well, and that makes a difference. So I've got more and more people saying, oh yeah, you're part of economic development, without having to explain it to them. And that to me is success.
Wow, that's great.
And I want it to be a sustainable success. So
That's terrific. I would be remiss if I didn't cover this and recognize my friend Simone McFarland Hall. Tell me about your conservation efforts at the department.
So one of my very first official meeting at the land department was to drive to Prescott for the auction of the land where our 19 firefighters died at Granite Mountain. And I've spent a tremendous amount of time in that area. One of the largest ranchers were family friends of ours, and I can remember him. Actually, he was a former member of the legislature, John Hayes. I can remember Senator Hayes saying to me, we're completely surrounded by state land, and I don't understand why they don't take care of it more. Well, I know that. But when you've got juniper growing all over the state, it was a fire hazard. So when your first introduction to how land is managed is that particular circumstance, which will be with us every day from now into eternity. And of course, next week this week actually, is the opening of the Granite Mountain Park up in Yarnell. Then you begin to remember that we live in a state that is absolutely blessed with a lot of land. We know what it's like when we watch federal agencies who don't manage their land, that forests become overgrown, BLM becomes overgrown, because there are never going to be enough resources to manage all those lands. And we've got interspersed wilderness areas that don't allow you to manage those lands. They're supposed to be wild and beautiful, or national monuments. I can't let that same thing happen to state trust land, because it is an asset that was designed to be managed all along. So Simone Westbrook Hall, who's the director of the Natural Resources Division of the department, has her own experience in natural resource issues as well, and agreed that we need to be more proactive in the management. So we are doing our best with limited resources to transition, to see how we manage watersheds, to see how we manage landscapes. And as a result of that, yesterday when the forester and I met, we had the final signing of an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, between DFFM and the State Land Department on large swaths of land throughout the state. We're generally the gateway to BLM and Forest Service lands, so it's a very proactive agreement between the two of us. And later at the August meeting, I think, of the Game and Fish Board Commission, they're going to be authorizing a signature between the Game and Fish Director and I to do the same thing. So we are reaching out and actively pursuing partnerships with not just our state agency colleagues, but also with the feds. We learned a lot during COVID when all of us were going through shutdowns. We obviously learn a lot every year when we have fire season. And there's no reason that the state trust holdings need to be held out as a separate part of watershed and landscapes in the state. And that's very important to me personally. So we've pivoted that focus, and it's in fabulous hands with Simone.
Well, that's terrific that you're taking the stewardship of the trust lands so seriously and sharing some of those responsibilities with folks like DFFM and Game and Fish. So
The experts.
Absolutely, they are. Well, I don't see a whole lot of other questions coming up here, and we're getting short on time. There is one question about who to contact when there are parcels, state land parcels identified that have been abused with dumping and so forth. Is there somebody that the agency?
The trespass unit, so all you have to do is call the main number. Oh, this is going to be embarrassing. All you have to do is call the main number at the land department, which I unfortunately do not know off the top of my head, but I'm going to find out before I finish the sentence.
That's okay. The internet's a wonderful.
Or they can, yeah, or you can go online to azland.gov and file something online. We do have an online system I'm so proud of. Or you can call 602-542-4631 and you'll be put in touch with the right person. And you can all thank Christine for being here with me because I couldn't remember that number of my life depended on it.
Thank you, Christine, for saving the day. Well, good.
Well, just either call the number or go online and send a request in, and we'll get hold of it. It's not just, it's got to be handled.
Yeah.
And it's not a responsibility that we ultimately have, but I know the damage that can be done. But most importantly, we need to be concerned about those people who can only find shelter by being on state trust land, because dumping then kind of attracts people, ironically, and that's a hazard.
Yeah.
We have a lot of Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts that use state trust land. We have a very robust geocaching program, and I worry sometimes that with the dumping that goes on, that's also a hazard, not to mention potential damage to cultural resources, which we have a lot of.
For sure, for sure. Commissioner, you've been very gracious with your time, and I just can't thank you enough for the partnership over the years and for doing what you've done for economic development as well as the state land department. We're fortunate to have you. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.
Okay. Have a good day.
Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Bye.